Now, amidst the last major climate change summit in Marrakesh in Morocco, there was one power source that was notably more absent, more by its absence than by anything else, and it's nuclear power. It doesn't get much attention, but you'd be surprised at just how many African countries either have, are thinking about, or are planning to acquire nuclear power. To date, there's only one active nuclear power plant on the entire continent, and this is it. It's Coburg. It's owned by Eskom. It's an 1,800 megawatt facility over in the Western Cape. Now, South Africa had planned at some point to add another 10 gigawatts or so of new nuclear generation capacity, but the sheer cost of that particular power plant, estimated at about $50 billion for all the reactors combined, has proven to be a bit too much to swallow for South African taxpayers. That, however, is not stopping other countries from forging ahead. As of November this year, there are about 8 African states in the planning stages of their respective nuclear power programs or carrying them out altogether. It's a fairly diverse bunch, as you can see on this map. You've got Nigeria, Ghana and Senegal over in the west. You've got the East African states over here, and of course Zambia and Namibia in the south. In 2012, Nigeria signed a deal with Rosatom, the Russian nuclear power firm, to design, construct, operate and decommission nuclear power plants. Now, the 4 that it plans to build could cost as much as $20 billion, with an installed generation capacity of about 4.8 gigawatts, according to the chairman of the Nigerian Atomic Energy Commission. The first of these should be online by 2025. And that, incidentally, is around the exact same time that the Kenyans expect to commission their first of their 4 planned nuclear reactors. The East African nation, however, plans to have slightly less installed generation capacity at about 4 gigawatts, and likely at a higher price. The estimates range from between $20 to $36 billion at current exchange rates. Now, leaving all those numbers aside, especially the question of cost, because as South Africa has proven that can be a huge obstacle, why consider nuclear power? Well, here's one common argument: nuclear, solar and wind. Nuclear power plants take up a lot less space compared to solar or wind power plants of the exact same capacity. Look at these numbers up here: 3.3 square kilometers for a nuclear power plant, 673 square kilometers required for the same capacity on wind alone. And none of these produce any harmful emissions in the process. Well, that's the overview, and we've established, of course, that Nigeria is very keen on harnessing nuclear tech. But where exactly is its nuclear program right now? Well, the country also has significant uranium deposits to supply the proposed nuclear power plant. But, as Kelechi Mekalam now explains, its plans so far have largely remained on paper.
Talks about harnessing nuclear technology in Nigeria started back in 2007 under former President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua. He had planned to include nuclear power to Nigeria's grid by 2017, but nothing has come to fruition. Before his death, President Yar'Adua had succeeded in setting up the Nigeria Atomic Energy Commission, which still remains in place. But Nigeria's nuclear ambition have not been struck off the government's agenda. Early this year, President Buhari made a passionate defense for Nigeria's plans to harness nuclear energy at a nuclear security summit in Washington. President Buhari has made revamping Nigeria's epileptic power sector his priority. Currently, the country depends on a mix of hydroelectric power and gas. It has an installed capacity of about 10,000 megawatts, but actual power supplied frequently falls below 3,000 megawatts. Now, developing nuclear technology in developing countries has been a controversial affair. The International Atomic Energy Agency requires 17 years structured program for a country to develop a nuclear technology. But with an economy on tailspin, Nigeria's nuclear program could take much longer to actualize. Kelechi Mekalam, CCTV Abuja, Nigeria.
Up in North Africa, Egypt's government expects to finalize a nuclear power deal with Russia in coming weeks. The $25 billion loan deal is expected to be repaid over decades. As Adel Makuki now reports, Egypt says it will only start paying its first installment of that loan after the first reactor starts becoming operational.
Egypt says it's getting unique facilitations from Russia in the biggest single loan deal the country has seen. Moscow's $25 billion represent 85% of the project's cost. Egypt will have to raise the 15% remaining. That's worth $4.5 billion. The deal includes 4 1,200 megawatts nuclear electric generating plants. Egypt is expected to start its installment after the first power plant starts operation. That's not expected before 2024. The 43 semi-annual installments will be paid over 22 years with a 3% interest rate. According to the initial agreement, Egypt aims to make 25% of the power plants manufactured locally. Egyptian officials say the final deal should be signed within 2 months by both President Putin and el-Sisi. Egypt generates around 35,000 megawatts of electricity, depending mainly on fossil fuels. Local experts say that nuclear plants should save the country from $200 to $340 million. Adil Mahroui, CCTV, Cairo.
Right then, we've heard the argument for nuclear power in the biggest economies in West Africa and in North Africa. Let's turn our attention now to East Africa. At an estimated cost, as I mentioned earlier, $20 billion at the very least for 4 gigawatts of generation capacity. Kenya's nuclear power ambitions are not cheap. A May 2016 report commissioned by this country's energy ministry was critical not just of the cost of nuclear power, but also of the estimated future power demand, saying that past assumptions simply were not realistic. So then, in light of that and the declining cost of alternatives like solar power, is there still a case for nuclear power in East Africa? That's a question I put to the head of the country's budding nuclear power program.
When I zero in on the nuclear parameters that were used in the Lamea report, and we gave our comments to Lamea team, they were not realistic. First of all, Lamea talked of a plant of 600. We were not going for 600, we were going for 1,000. Secondly, Lamea talked about the life of the plant of 40 years. The plants of 40 years are being decommissioned. We are going for a plant of 80 years. Then the costings that Lamea gave of around 8 billion USD are out of where we are checking the figures for the cost of 1,000 megawatts.
But where's the difference in those figures? Because if you look at most of the major nuclear power plants that have been developed of late, I mean, like Hinkley Point, for example, wildly over the budget that actually had been initially put out and the initial cost estimates. I mean, isn't it reasonable to ask that $5 billion that we're working, $5 billion figure we're working with now might actually be increased by a factor of, say, 20%?
Well, I would say that when it comes to costing, then it depends on where you are getting your vendor from. You can get a vendor from Korea, or you can get a vendor from the US. If you try and check their costing, I'll give you an example. Leave alone the Hinkley the plant, the United Arab Emirates. It was not even 5 billion. It was almost 4 point something billion USD. But this technology is almost the same. Korean technology is similar to Westinghouse. But if they were doing it from the US, maybe the figures would have been different.
Some other things also cropped up in this Lamea report. And I'm quoting them here directly. For baseload, geothermal power plants are ranked best in terms of generation costs. And this is what they said about nuclear power. It shows the highest cost for all baseload plants. Even at maximum availability, they're less economical than coal and natural gas fueled candidates. Same argument?
No, it has been argued, and that statement was not correct. Even the availability factor they had put for nuclear, was it 91 or something like that?
Yeah.
It's around 98. So I'm telling you that I also had my reservation about that report. So it's not the report, that report is not something that I would want to dwell on to make a decision.
But okay, ultimately, at the end of the day, governments made a decision to go with nuclear power. Then along come these German consultants who say, well, your math may be off here. But what's the final decision? Is the original plan still on course?
We are not doing a regional plant. We are looking for nuclear for the
Kenyan economy.
Kenyan economy. Uganda is doing the same. I think you saw in the press the other day, the president himself chaired a meeting, and I think they're trying to go with the Russian technology. They're also looking at nuclear, depending on their dynamics.
One final question for you, because if we pull back and look at East Africa, we've got a strong comparative advantage in geothermal power. Ethiopia is on this massive dam building spree, and for that $5 billion we're spending on, or rather we plan to spend on one reactor, they've built the Grand Renaissance Dam, and that's 6 gigawatts. Tanzania's got lots of natural gas.
And uranium.
That too. We keep forgetting that part. They've got a lot of uranium as well. But if you take all these factors into consideration, and the fact that we're building a regional power pool, how do these elements then mesh together?
Well, I said that this decision was based on figures. If those figures are revised and they change again, then the government can still make a decision on that. But currently, we are basing it on the figures that were done by the Least Cost Power Development Plan. That's why I said that I don't want to mix that one with the Lamea report. Coming back to the Eastern African power pool, the government has a policy on energy security. And I think the policy is that you cannot import more than 20% or something like that. We can import even 100%. But you remember what happened between the Russian gas pipeline to Europe. They can cut it anytime. So the government wants to have that assurance of energy security.
Part of my conversation there a little earlier on in the day with the acting CEO of the National Nuclear Electricity Board in Kenya.